is Melissa Smith. She comes to us originally from Maryville, Tennessee, William Blount High School. She's also a graduate of Pellissippi State, a biology major, and also a diver on the swim team. And today she's going to give us a presentation on some work involving heart surgery and some modern technologies related to that.
I did my research in microwave atrial fibrillation ambulation and in techniques of robot mitral valve repair, and also in dose curve response in cardioplegia arrested and in the beating heart. Before we get started, I'd like to go kind of over what the big problem is. And the big problem here is atrial fibrillation. And in atrial fibrillation, we have these signals here that are sporadic. And this is due to this electric pathway just being interfered with. So a little more on the pathway, we have the SA node, which is your pacemaker, which sends out these signals to the AV node, and which goes to the bundle of His and the Bachman's branches, and finally the left and right bundle branches. And what is happening in atrial fibrillation is that a bunch of signals from the pacemaker are being sent, and they're getting caught up in the top part of the heart, causing the heart to contract at different times. So we have the top part contracting before the bottom part, and that's where we go down here to the EKG line, where we have this kind of sporadic heel versus this nice sinus rhythm, which is what we want. In my first research, what they did is have 16 patients that had not only atrial fibrillation, but a mitral backflow problem, and that's located here. And with the contractions of the heart being sporadic, this mitral backflow problem is increased. And so what they hypothesized was, can we combine these two procedures into one? And I'm going to take you through the pre-operation and the operation and the post-operation. So in the beginning, you have the patient's history where they have these two problems. Generally, these two problems are treated with medication, but sometimes medication isn't enough. So the doctor and the patient sit down and have what they call advisory sessions, and that was what was done here with these 16 patients. And they look at what is called mapping. Now this is done in a various of ways. What they did in their research was an echoing. And what an echoing essentially is the stimulation of these cells in the SA node and the AV node, and seeing where these electric impulses are getting caught up. And this is not from their research. This is actually just an image that I found to kind of get you an idea of what they're looking at. These little dots here are lesions that were placed by microwave ambulation. And I'm going to take the time here to kind of explain what microwave ambulation is. And microwave ambulation is where this flex 10 catheter or rod is being inserted through the leg up into the heart and stimulating these water molecules in the tissue, causing ulcers or lesions in these atrial walls. And what we wanted, why we want to do that, or why they want to do that, is kind of cut off these signals that are being sent out through the heart and get a nice sinus rhythm versus an atrial fibrillation rhythm. So once the pre-operation is set and they agreed upon this operation, we have the mini thoracotomy, which is a 2 centimeter opening inside the upper of the chest. and this allows access to the heart. Secondly, we have the cardiopulmonary bypass, and that's pretty much the starting point of this procedure, where we have a roughly around 3 to 6 catheters going in through the leg up into the heart. This can be done by the superior or inferior vena cava. Kind of help you visualize that. They can go in through the leg and enter through here to access this back side of the heart, or up through the neck and the chest to access the superior vena cava here. And what we're trying to do is we have this heart and we're kind of rotating it around to get to these pulmonary veins and arteries, to get to these pulmonary veins, which is here, and making incisions with the microwave ambulation in here, causing lesions in the heart, so that we can cut off these sporadic signals. And the pulmonary bypass helps us with that, in that we can get this cardioplegia arrested heartbeat, which is medication and a cooling system where we can decrease the heart rhythm and get these transmural lesions. And what these transmural lesions are is lesions that are made from this microwave ambulation or flex 10 catheter, stimulating the water molecules and making kind of like a cut or an ulcer. Finally, we have the Da Vinci system, which is a robotic system that's going to help us fix this mitral valve repair and kind of isolate the pulmonary veins and the arteries. Then the lesions of the pulmonary venous line are made. This is kind of help out with that backflow problem. Nextly, we have the pulmonary veins that are isolated, but we're cutting into here, extracting the catheter, and finally, in stage 8, we are closing this up and then accessing the mitral valve from back here. And that is done by the Da Vinci system. To kind of elaborate on the bypass, this is kind of an enlarged picture here of what I'm kind of demonstrating up here so you guys can really see what's going on. So here you have the inferior vena cava, and this is where your catheters are going to come in, ideally. But they can come from back here or up here. Then we have our catheter that's going to go through here and in here, and in this wall here, there are going to be lesions to kind of stop this sporadic electric, sporadic signals. But to focus more on the bypass, what this does is provide a circulatory system, and in their research they had 16 patients that used their own circulatory system, in that they could separate oxygenated and deoxygenated blood within their own system. But they did have one patient that needed a heart and lung machine, which is a machine that takes units of blood and provides a circulatory system outside the body. And again, this coronary bypass allows us to go into the cardioplegia arrested, in that we're clamping these pulmonary arteries and restricting the contractions and getting a slower heartbeat and keeping the heart cool so we can have transmural lesions. Furthermore, on the Da Vinci system, again, this is a robotic system, and you will have 4 prongs that are going inside the chest. Here are the arms that the surgeons use to kind of isolate the pulmonary veins from the pulmonary arteries. And then we have a camera arm, which gives the reference surgeon a 3-dimensional image of the heart. To kind of give you an idea of a surgical setting, or what this looks like in a surgical setting. You have your Da Vinci system here with your 4 prongs inside the chest. Your main surgeon here working with the Da Vinci system. A surgeon tech or a nurse will be looking at an EKG, making sure there's not complications. And then our reference surgeon here, pretty much looking at the camera view from here and confirming the placement of these catheters and the Flex 10. Methods, this is from the article that I used, and they broke the procedure up into A, B, and C. And here we have the pulmonary vein box that's being isolated, and then we have the pulmonary vein box being cut away and our Flex 10 catheter coming in and causing these lesions. And thirdly, C, we have the Flex 10 catheter that's being extracted, this pulmonary vein box being sewn back together and working, and then the Da Vinci system coming in and fixing that mitral valve problem. These are pictures from the surgery, again from the essay that I used. It's really kind of hard to see in that from a surgical point of view, they're kind of looking at roughly around a 2 centimeter vision of the heart and where all these catheters are going. But a brief overview, this is the pulmonary vein box and the catheters going into the pulmonary vein box. B, the catheter in the heart and causing these lesions. And then finally C, the pulmonary vein box being stitched back together and the Da Vinci system kind of taking over and fixing that pulmonary mitral valve problem. This is kind of an enlarged picture because I kind of find these pictures over here kind of hard to see. So these are the other catheters other than the Flex 10 that was going into the heart. And what these do is kind of isolate those pulmonary veins. And then we have our Flex 10 catheter coming in through the vena cava into the atrial and causing these lesions here. Again, this is your SA node, your pacemaker that's sending out these signals, your AV node that is receiving these signals and then transferring them into the branches of his and the Brockman's branches here, and then your left and right bundle branches here. Finally, we have, after the operation, more medication, a couple of nights in the ICU, make sure there was no further complications with the surgery or infections, and then a week or so in the hospital under supervision so that if there was complications with the surgery, they can be fixed in a timely manner. Then finally, we have the checkups where patients are coming in and visiting with their doctor and looking over the charts and making sure the procedure was efficient. This is their results. This is the procedure in more of a respect of time. And I'd just like to highlight some of the things that I thought was pretty significant in their research is the cross clamp, which is pretty much creating that cardioplegia arrest. And it was pretty much the majority of the procedure, as you see, 133 minutes, where the whole operation that took place was 5.4 hours. And then our in their research, their max time was 9.4 hours. And this is due to that patient that couldn't use their own circulatory system. They needed that heart and lung machine and units of blood. I referred to Bristol Medical Center. They actually do this operation. Dr. Jones called me back about this operation, and he actually does these procedures, and his results was pretty much the same in practice in that his operations usually take 6 to 8 hours. What he suggests is that if the procedure takes more than 8 hours, usually cuts off stops the surgery and tries again at another time, just because you have all these catheters going in through the body and it can be very uncomfortable for the patient. Finally, we have the length of stay in the hospital was roughly 6.3 days. This is pretty significant in that these are two pretty extensive surgeries, and these patients were really only in the hospital for a week and then let go to go home and recover. They had one patient that had other complications other than the defects in the heart, and that's where they get this maximum of 43 days. He unfortunately passed away in the hospital. This is a nice little graph. This is the percentage of patients on the y-axis, and then the duration of recovery on our x-axis. And this white or beige color is atrial fibrillation. Again, atrial fibrillation is where you have the sporadic heart rhythm. And then here in the burgundy or purple, we have junctional rhythm, and junctional rhythm can be described as in between the two of sinus rhythm and atrial fibrillation. In blue, we have sinus rhythm, which is what we want, and I'm going to highlight some of these peaks here. Just after the surgery, there was only 7 patients that was in atrial fibrillation, which is pretty significant, I think. But then we have this decline after surgery on day 2, where there's an increase in atrial fibrillation and junctional rhythm. And in the essay, they believe this was due to it was a pretty intense surgery, and they're recovering, and plus medication is now being added, and finding the correct dose of the medication was a problem too. But by 6 weeks, patients are now leaving the hospital, and out of the 16 patients, they had none in atrial fibrillation, which is pretty significant in that, again, Dr. Jones said that he advises that surgery be kind of like a last option. So these patients have tried everything until finally they needed surgery. And so this surgery proved to be pretty efficient in that in roughly around 6 weeks, they have pretty much solved their atrial fibrillation problems. Conclusion, again, their goal was to combine atrial fibrillation in microwave ambulation with mitral valve repair. And by this data, I believe they were able to accomplish that, in that only 7% of patients right after surgery had atrial fibrillation. And by 6 weeks' time, they had no patients in atrial fibrillation. And again, advantage of the surgery is most of these patients are older, and surgery costs money, a lot of money. And combining these two surgeries together not only is easier on the wallet, but is a faster time to recover and easier on the patient as well. My second research was in, again, microwave ambulation for atrial fibrillation, but with a dose curve response in the cardioplegia arrested and in the beating heart. And what they asked is, can dose response curves in microwave ambulation produce transmural lesions in the cardioplegia arrested heart and in the beating heart? Again, transmural lesions are lesions that are made by stimulating the water molecules in these tissues and causing these ulcers or openings. And how they did that, they had 12 pigs and divided them into 2 groups. And the first group was the beating heart, and the second group was the cardioplegia arrested heart. And in both of these groups, 6 atrial endocardial lesions and 7 right ventricle epicardial lesions were created in each pig. The duration of the ambulations was a range of 15 to 150 seconds at 65 watts. Referencing to my first article, the ambulations were at 45 seconds and at 65 watts. The tissue, the hearts were then extracted from the pigs and stained so that the depth and the width of these lesions could be determined. This is our Flex 10 microwave device, our catheter that's being inserted. The size of this thing is roughly the size of this, with a coffee straw or a coffee straw antenna coming out. To give you kind of an idea of how big this thing is going into the heart. So what they found is they took these lesions, as you can see here, and measured the width and the depth of each lesion. Our first graph is the percent of transmural lesions in the cardioplegia arrested heart, which is indicated here on our y-axis. And then the time of or duration of microwave ambulation on our x-axis. And from this, we can see from 33 to 120 seconds that we had roughly around 97% of transmural lesions. Versus our second graph here, where we had the beating heart and the transmural lesions on our y-axis and the duration of time on our x-axis. You can see that from 45 to 90, they had roughly around 35% of transmural lesions versus 97% in the cardioplegia arrested heart. And from that, we can get these two graphs here, which is the percent of depth of the lesions in millimeters on our y-axis and the duration of time on our x-axis. This dark line here is the cardioplegia arrested heart, and the dotted line is the beating heart. And from this graph, we can tell that there is a nice linear line where if we increase the time, we can get deeper lesions in the tissue. The second graph here is the lesions width in millimeters and the duration of time on our x-axis. Again, the dark line is the cardioplegia arrested heart, and the dotted line is the beating heart. And what was significant with this is that as you increase the time of microwave ambulation, the cardioplegia arrested heart increased the width of the lesions versus the beating heart, where it kind of peaked at roughly around 120 seconds and kind of leveled out through 180 seconds. These lines here are the percent error, where they took the measurements of these lesions and they calculated a percent error of where they might have missed the size of the lesion made. So from this data, we can see that we have that they can produce linear dose curve response. That as we increase the time of microwave ambulation, we can get a more reliable longer width and depth with increase of time in microwave ambulation versus the beating heart, where you can't really rely on increasing the microwave ambulation to get transmural lesions. These are my references. This is my 2 articles that I am referencing from and my pictures. Any questions? Yes.
Was he compared 2 techniques that are used to repair damaged parts? Are those standard ways of repairing, or are these experimental ways of repairing damage?
The second essay, using the dose curve response, is experimental. It has not been used in a surgical setting. But the first essay, using microwave ambulation in the cardioplegia arrested heart only, is used in Bristol Medical Center actually right now.
Is that a traditional means of repairing this damage, or is this something that has happened within the last 3 to 5 years?
This has happened in the last around 10 to 15 years. To kind of give you an idea, this research that I present was presented in 2005, and it was fairly new in 2005. Yes?
In that first paper where the patients had, they had a mitral valve problem and they had atrial fibrillation, were those 2 things related to each other, or did they just happen to have both problems?
They didn't specify. They didn't really do a case study for these patients in the research, but I imagine some of these patients, it did have effect with atrial fibrillation causing problems with the mitral valve.
And the other question was, did it say why they didn't just get a pacemaker? Like the artificial pacemaker?
Not in the research, but from Bristol Medical Center and the doctors there, they like this procedure just due to the fast recovery and that it's a small incision versus going in and putting in a pacemaker. And it's just a little cheaper and less major surgery than putting in a pacemaker.